Okay, I'm starting in 30 seconds, maybe 20,
After,
maybe Clint, when Clint gets through.
I'm just telling you, after we're done this, we'll put the snacks and all that stuff back out, so we'll have a little longer break.
Okay. More responsible that can set them out. Clint, I saw him in there. It was like one for them, one for me. I kind of worry about that, but at least he's not counting the contribution that way. So there you go. I want to say a little bit about sharing stories from other people. One of the things that has power is in your community of faith. When you're talking to someone and they say, "But my life is," and we're going to talk a lot more about that. But let me tell you this: we need to share our stories with each other more. You need to know how your community of faith. How did you find out about Jesus? How did you come to believe in the Lord? How did you do? What did you do? We need to know. We need to hear those stories because there's power in stories. And y'all have. I've heard some stories from this community of faith. There are some powerful stories here. But I also want you to know the reason I share stories with you is here's what I want you to do when you're hearing one of the stories I share is to say, you know what? I know somebody like that. Hey, I could do that. Hey, because you're going to hear most of the stories we tell, it's not going to be just Steve found or Chris. It'll be, boy, Chris and Steve or Leroy and Lois and Steve and Marcia or he did and they did. And you'll find out it takes a lot of us sometime and you never know what part you're playing. So that's one reason I share these stories to help you say, hey, if they can do that in Abilene, we can do that in, I am in Boise, right? Okay, Boise, yeah. Because 2 weeks ago in Chicago, I blurted out, you could do that in Nashville. And when it came out of my mouth, I thought, I'm a week off. Last week I was in Nashville, and they're going to do that, so in Chicago, you can too. Hey, preaching has a season, right? Traveling preachers, fall's heavy and spring's heavy. Past that, nobody wants to hear us. But there's a short window when you really travel a lot. So I want to tell you the story of Joseph and Angela. Joseph was actually converted about 6 or 7 years ago, right before he went to prison. Drugs. They both grew up on the streets. They'd been together for a while before he went to prison. And he ended up going, but before he went to prison, there was a guy named Gary Stone. And he told Gary, he said, when I get out, I will find you in Abilene, and I will come. I'll get back to Abilene, and I'm going to start going to church with you, and I won't give up on Jesus while I'm in jail. Okay, if you've worked with people very long, everybody says, and they mean it usually, but man, you're going to press, going to be a hard thing. So he goes, serves his sentence, gets out, works his way to a halfway house in Abilene, reconnects with Gary. Starts coming to Hillcrest with Gary and his wife. They start a Bible study in their halfway house. It's really a neat thing. Joseph comes up one day, and you'll hear some other stories from people Joseph's connected with, but Joseph said, hey, my wife, well, not exactly my wife, but my girl, well, she's more than a girlfriend, lady you're living with. It's okay, you can say whatever it is. And he says, yeah, she's coming up here to Abilene. She's going to live with me, but she says she's going to come to church. We said, good, we'd like to meet her. Bring her to class. He said, I'm going to. She moves up. Now, they moved in together. And you're going, well, didn't you say you can't do that? They knew, hence what's happening there. So they start coming to class. Marcia, my wife, has them over for lunch one day. And they're sitting there, and I look over, and tears are trickling down their cheeks. I'm like, that's my wife. I love her. Is the food bad? I don't know. I didn't cook it. She did. And I said, no, you guys okay? And here are two things. She said, we have never been in a home and had a meal cooked for us. Never. I said, you've never eaten a meal in a home. No, we've never had a home. We lived on the streets. Never had a cooked meal. Lived on the streets. I said, okay, Joseph, is that why you're upset? And he said, no, I know we're not doing right. We shouldn't be living together. And Angela said, but this whole thing is so new. Okay, well, let's visit about it. So what we finally settled down to is Angela agreed to come over and hear Jesus stories. And so she came over and we told Jesus stories for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. And she said, I get it. I know why Joseph wants to do this. I want to be baptized too. So we baptized Angela. We let people, when we baptize most of our people we have assembly first, worship first, then class. We baptize most of our people between worship and right at the end of worship. So a whole church is there, and for a lot of them, nobody's ever clapped for them or saluted them, and so we do a lot of standing ovations. I mean, you're making the greatest commitment of your life, so we go kind of nuts over it. It's pretty neat. But we let them do their own confession. We just ask them, what do you believe about Jesus? And a lot of them say, well, he's God's son, died for my sins. And raised from the dead, and I want to follow. Okay, that's great. She said, she's doing it, and she said, he's the Son of God who died for my many, many sins. I thought, wow, that's a great way to say that, because we've all got our many, many sins. So we baptized Angela. We're doing a celebration meal a couple weeks later, Nathan and his wife, Marcia and I and them. And they said, okay, we've talked about it. We want to honor God, so we're going to get married. That's great. And then she said, Marcia, can we leave? Can I talk to you? My wife gets up. She and Angela trot off. Comes back, sits down, and Marcia says, we're doing a wedding. I'm like, honey, we got married a long time ago. I said, not us, you moron. No, she didn't say that. But she said, no, they want to get married, and we're going to do it. So after they left, I said, what? I didn't get all this. She said, she called me back there to say, I don't know how to get married. Never been to a wedding. I have no idea what to do. So our church threw a wedding. Marcia took them, got their marriage license, took them out to celebrate after they got their license. You know what they wanted to have for their celebration meal? Whataburger. I knew I loved them, but it got even better. It's just like this. How great can this be? A couple of our ladies out of the Journey class took her to some thrift shops and looked till they found a wedding dress that fit her. That's a thrift shop wedding dress. We put together a little video for them. We did the music. We decided Nathan, our preacher, did the ceremony, and I gave her away. And when I walked her down the aisle and they said, who gives this woman in marriage? I said, her church community and I. Because that's and then the church put on the reception. Did it upright, really a sweet thing. And here's what matters to that. When you start reaching people and they really don't know Jesus, you're going to be amazed at the things that come into play with that. You're going, yeah, we may have to help them with lodging or food. Yes, those kind of things, but things like that. Man, they're living together. Somebody's got, well, that shows how bad they were. They didn't know. They didn't know until they kind of started coming to church they shouldn't be living, because all they ever knew was that kind of thing. And now somebody's going, so boy, that's a great story. It's been good. No, they've converted a lot of people. They've helped a lot of people find Jesus. And they've had a lot of struggles, a lot of battles, because addictions are hard. And when you love Jesus, sometimes it gets harder because Satan gets madder. And so they've had their struggles and battles. And one of the conditions for parole in Texas, you have to have a permanent address. And they had some family members move in with them, and they fought, and they brought some drugs in. Long story short, they got evicted. And so Joseph got picked up and went back to prison. In Texas, we call it, the slang for it is a parole timeout. You have 45 or 90 days to kind of get your act cleaned back up, and then you can get released. And so we've been videoing on our phones and sending to him, and the prison guards look at it and then let him see it. Our Journey class, and he writes letters. But his letters have all been, I'm sorry, this was my fault. I'm going to get out and lead my family. I'm telling people in church about Jesus. And so 3 weeks ago, this guy walks into our Journey class. Okay, people wondering all the time, and we met him, and I said, hey, so what brought you to Hillcrest, the Journey class? I thought he'd say, well, I saw the sign, or somebody asked me, somebody saw me at Whataburger and invited me. He said, I just got released from prison this morning. I said, really? Hearing that, he said, yeah, right here at French Robertson. I'm out. And he said, right before I got out, there's this guy named Joseph in jail with me. I said, yeah, I know Joseph. He said, oh, I know you do. He told me to find you. He said, when you get out, you go to Hillcrest because they help people and you need Jesus. In prison. How great is that? There are people like that everywhere because here's kind of the call that Jesus gave us. You remember the story. We're not going to tell the whole story, but Peter, Jesus preaches. Peter hears him. By the way, Peter had fished all night, didn't do any good, so he's having a bad business day, not going like he wanted. He's sleepy, he is tired, and he's out there in a boat doing this, and a guy's preaching. And apparently Peter stays awake. He is my hero for any number of reasons, but yeah. And then, Jesus says, let's go out here and catch fish. Okay, you ever done this with God and Jesus? Well, I know what you're saying, but you really can't do that because we've been out there are no fish. This is going to be embarrassing for you, for me, but hey, it's you, so I'll do it. Boy, I think about that a lot. You're telling us to go talk to everybody, and you know what? You don't know how hard that is. Well, yeah, number one, I do know how hard that is because I do it all the time. So we do know. But number two, I want to tell you, we almost like, okay, God, I don't think this is going to work, but since you want me to, we'll try it. I get that. Some of you are going to say, okay, I'm going to try my neighbor, but they're not going to be interested. They're not going to come. This is a waste of time. You know what? Good for you. Try it anyhow. Do it anyhow because that's what God wants you to do. Because when they caught all those fish, remember all the fish? Caught all those fish. First thing Peter, when he saw those, he falls on his knees and said, get away from me. I'm a sinful man. And in effect, Jesus says, of course you are. I know that. That's why I'm calling you. Come on. You'll be forgiven, and we are going to go catch men. We're going to catch men. I love that. And that's kind of our job, is to fish for men. You think, what's the purpose of our church? Well, praise God, or be doctrinally sound, or be sure. There are lots of things you can say are important about church. And they are important. But your mission is to fish for men. As a Christian and as a church, that is our call. Okay, you're talking about all that, but I still don't get this whole thing about how I get to talk to people. How does that happen? I want to, but I don't get it. Okay, let me tell you one way it happens. This story goes back now about 15 years, probably. Our son in high school bought a golden retriever puppy. And then he went to college. And so you know what happened to the dog? We got the dog. That dog's name was Remington. Now, okay, if any of y'all hunt, yes, we're Texas. We are those people. My son named it after a shotgun, named his dog after a shotgun. Well, when he went to college, Remington became my dog. We hung out together. We started out running together, and then we got a little older, and so we jogged together, and then we waddled together. So that's kind of how we did our the only thing I never did like about Remington, this is true, we'd go dove hunting. I don't know if y'all dove hunt up here, but in Texas, that's a big, we're in the season right now. And so Remington would sit by me, and if I missed my first 2 or 3 shots, idiot would get up and walk down to the next guy and sit by them. It just was like, really? So one day, we were out waddling, and Remington scrabbled with his feet and kind of fell down, and then kind of got up, and we finished the jog, and I thought, boy, that's weird. A couple of days later, he did it twice on our little run. So I called the vet and said, hey, this is what's happening. He said, how old's Remington now? And I said, I don't know, 14 or 15 years. And he said, for a purebred golden, he's ancient. I mean, he's older than you are. And I was like, oh, that's not good. So he said, what he's having mini strokes. And at some point, they're going to get bad enough, you're going to have to do something. So we went a couple more weeks, and then it started happening almost every day. One Sunday, one of the few Sundays I was in town, because I was traveling a lot then, we came home from church. I walked down the back porch, and he was spinning in a circle on his side on the back porch. Well, I jumped out, grabbed him, pulled him up real close, and he just went limp, and I thought, oh, man, he's just died in my arms. And then I felt that little golden tongue right there, so I called the vet, and he said, Steve, it's time. So I go in and talk to Marcia, and she said, honey, he's old, he's sick. It's time to put him down. And I said, okay, I'm going to be gone next week. Why don't you do it? Didn't quite work out that way. And the only thing I didn't like about that, I had this vision in a few years of me taking my annual physical, and I'm going to hear the doctor and Marcia going to say, he's old, he's sick. Yeah, put him down. So as you often do when you have a dog you love, we weren't going to get another dog. And then we started thinking, if we did, and so we had a couple of conditions on it. One of them was we were only going to spend a certain amount of money because, well, we have a lot of kingdom stuff we want to do, and so your budgets. So we weren't going to spend more than this much on a new dog if we got one. And then we decided to pray about it. You prayed about getting a dog? Well, we're believers, so yeah, I mean, it's kind of what we do, isn't it? And we pray about everything. And you should too. Everything in your life, you ought to bring before God. Even if you're saying, hey, this is just for me. It's a favor. I'd like this, please, or I need everything. So one day my wife was looking through the newspaper, and she said, I don't know if it's the Holy Spirit. I don't know. But I just saw this the littlest ad in the little thing, and it said Golden Retriever puppies for sale. Now, not too long before that, before I went back to before I started working at Herald Truth, I spent some time supporting myself, selling ads for an area-wide phone book. And if we were ever on the road, and they let me stay home more than most, and they let me come back every Wednesday to preach, and I would, when all the other salesmen would do what salesmen do on the road, go to the bar and drink, and I would go find somebody to go have cheeseburgers with me. I'm not sure physically it was much healthier than the drinking, because you can eat a lot of cheeseburgers if you're on the road very long, and talk about Jesus with people. So my wife makes this call and says, I'm Marcia Ridgell. Are you the lady that has the Golden Retriever puppies for sale? And the lady says, Ridgell, are you Steve's wife? Okay, y'all know Marcia, so y'all will know what's coming next. She says, maybe, why? And so here's what the lady said. My husband used to sell ads with Steve before he went back in full-time ministry. And when all the other guys would go to the bar and drink, they would go eat cheeseburgers and talk about Jesus. We would love for our puppies to go to a good home. So Marcia said, okay, how much are they? And she said, well, here's what we're asking. And then she said, but we know you, we'd love you to have it. We will sell it to you for, you want to take a guess? Exactly what we had budgeted. No, but exactly what we had said, half of what she asked, but what we had budgeted. So we went and got the dog. Then our granddaughter Avery was 2 years old, and she was with us, and we were trying to pick a name for the dog. And she said, we ought to call him Lucky. Now, y'all have already figured out I'm clearly the spiritual genius in our family. I mean, clearly. And so I said, Avery, with God, things aren't luck, and I'm about halfway through it. And I look over, and my wife is giving me, okay, any of y'all have been married more than, a year? You know how your wife can look at you, doesn't have to say a word, and you get everything. And here's what I was hearing clearly. Stop trying to tell our little granddaughter all this big theological stuff. Just listen. So I said, but Avery, why do you want to call him Lucky? And she said, well, we're lucky God gave him to us, and I think he'll be lucky that God gave him to us, so I think we ought to call him Lucky. And I said, you know what, Avery? You're right. That's a great name. Because the only names I were when she said Lucky, and I was trying to tell her God's not luck, I had this vision of me going out in the front yard and yelling, Providence of God, stop it! That's not really what I want to do, and so, gift from God, quit! No, that's not what I want to do. So we named him Lucky. You're going, okay, what in the world does that have to do with anything about telling people about Jesus? You ever been around a Golden Retriever? Our whole neighborhood grieved when Remington died. The whole neighborhood. And when we got our little puppy, Lucky, and put him out in the driveway in the front yard, what do you think happened to our whole neighborhood? Here they all came to see. And they'd say, hey, when'd you get the puppy? How'd you get the puppy? And we would say, well, we had prayed about it, and we had budgeted a certain amount of money, and we're calling him Lucky because our granddaughter said he was lucky God gave him. And our neighbors think they're hearing a little story about dogs. You know what they're hearing? We pray, we budget because we have kingdom stuff we think we ought to do. God did give them, we do believe God acts in our lives. That opened a whole bunch of discussions about Jesus. So Remington was pretty good about telling Lucky was pretty good about telling our whole neighborhood about Jesus. Everyday things in your life can become opportunities to say, something about God, about Jesus, about church. They do. It works that way. So, okay, Christian, if your God is so good, why is this world? And you know what? That's a great question. And if you don't think there aren't people out in our world wondering if we Christians, if our God is so good, where was your God when my wife got cancer and died? Where was your God when my kid was killed by a drunk driver? Where was your God when my house? I mean, I'm the spiritual one in the neighborhood, and my house, or we're the good ones, or we're the bad ones, and our home got torn up. So the guy goes to church. So explain that one, Christian. Or what about a tsunami here? Or what about, man, I went into work and boss came in and said, listen, things are tight and my nephew needs a job, and so he's getting yours. Where was God in that? Why is God not fair? Why? I love those questions. You know what my answer always is? Can I tell you a story? Why I think that? And here's the story I tell them. The garden. And I tell them, don't blame God for what God didn't do. God made a perfect world. And we made bad choices and messed it up. Don't blame God for what He didn't do. Now, there's a lot of things. I'm going to quick step this. I'm not going to preach you the story of creation. But in those first few chapters of Genesis, here are the kind of things you can talk about to non-believers when you're telling that story. It's a chance to talk about God made a perfect world. And of course, we end that story with the promise back to Eve that through your seed, the story of Jesus, that He will crush the head of Satan. His heel will be bruised. That's when He died on the cross. And I just tell them that way. I don't go into a deep study, but that's so we can talk about the perfect world He made and the perfect world coming back. You can talk about free will. You know, they had a choice. I mean, God put them in the garden. And all the creation, there are two trees He mentions. You remember what they were? Tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the one they couldn't eat from. Not that one. Tree of life is mentioned, and that's a pretty big deal because it's the tree of what? Life. And when they got kicked out of the garden, what could they not eat of? The tree of life. So guess what everybody had to do after that? Die. You go all the way to the Revelation. You want to hear a really neat thing? You know what's going to be in the new heaven? How great is that? Is that not just the coolest thing ever? So, you can talk about, we make choices. We do. And you can talk about the things Satan said. You remember the things Satan said to him? Did God really say? God didn't say. You won't die. It's not what or you'll be like God if. You don't think Satan doesn't use the same things in our world? They know. I mean, people, they'll say, well, but you Christians, God didn't. Yeah, God did say, and I can show you that. Or, yeah, and we do believe. And I really like that you'll be like God, because most of the people I know are in trouble because they try to run their own life. You ever tried that? Work out real well for you? Yeah, me either. So you can talk about that, free will and choice. You can talk about the poor choices they made. You can talk about the consequences they were put out there. And I have people sometimes say, oh yeah, I know the story. That's when God kicked them out and that was the way He punished them. I said, no, it's a consequence. That wasn't even God's punishment. The punishment's being away from God forever. The consequence of what they did was being put out of the garden. You can talk about blaming other people. I don't even think I put that one up there, but you can. Because remember how when God said, what happened? Well, first it was, the woman. So it's kind of her fault. And there, it's right there in the Bible. And anything goes wrong in your life, it's your wife's fault. It's right there in the Bible. So, yeah, sometimes you can misuse Scripture. But and remember who Eve blamed. Serpent, yeah, it was the devil. And in a way, they blamed God, because remember what Adam said? The woman, so if you're really technical, God, everything was pretty good till you put her here, so it's really your fault. You made me this way. Same thing Satan uses today. And of course, you can talk about God's plan to redeem. When people give you a chance by saying, what do you think? Where was your God? How about? Man, that is the open invitation to say, can I tell you a story? And I tell this story a lot. Now, when I tell this story, if they're sitting in our house, a lot of times I'll just grab an apple if we've got one sitting there, and I'll just roll the apple out on the table and say, doesn't that look good? Wouldn't that taste good? I did have a guy one time say, I hate apples. I was like, okay, let me bring that back. Let's do another approach. And somebody says, you don't know that was an apple, Steve. I know, I'm just telling the story. Now, I want to tell you how I tell my story. You do yours however you want. Here's how I tell stories. I just tell the story. I just say, you can, now, and sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, I kind of know that story, or, well, I never heard that story, and I'll say, well, that's in the Bible. Would you like to read it for yourself? And if they say, yeah, I would, but I don't have a, we always keep a bunch, in fact, I think the one I'm preaching out of tomorrow is one of the cheap ones we give out. We try to find, we haunt Bibles cheap if we can. And if somebody says, well, I don't have a Bible, say, great, let me give you one. Here, read. And then I tell them where to find, and we say, here's how you, this story, for instance, is in Genesis, or if we're looking at a story in John, and I say, here's how you find it. Look in the table of contents and find whatever we said, where it's John, 1 Corinthians, Genesis. You look in the table, find that, go to the page number. The big black letters, big black numbers are the chapters. So if we tell you it's in Genesis 3, you look for Genesis, then you look for the big black 3. And if we tell you it's in verse so-and-so, those are the little numbers. And so there you're teaching people how to use the Bible, and you're getting them into Bible study without them even knowing it. You want to read it for yourself? Here's where you can find it. Now, I'm amazed how many people go and say, hey, I read that story. You know what happened next? I'm like, you kept reading. And sometimes I'm like, yes, I do. And sometimes I'm like, no, but my wife probably does. Talk to her about it. So that's a great story to use. So, our friend Joseph, having Bible studies in the halfway house. And that is Joseph on the back. That's Gary that I talked about that connected with Joseph behind. John Koss is the man in the middle we're baptizing. Y'all have had a few of those here at Linder Road. Linder Road? Where am I? I am in Idaho at Linder Road. Okay. Y'all have had a few of those Sundays that nobody's ever going to forget. This was one of those days. John decided he wanted to be born again. John is crippled. He is paralyzed on his left side and weak on his right side. He had a stroke when he was in prison, and the doctors wanted to do some surgery to alleviate some brain stuff, and he said, no, I refuse treatment. I don't care if I die. It cannot be any worse. No. But he lived, just crippled him. And then he got out and ended up at the halfway house with Joseph, started coming to church, started coming to class. Gary and Joseph were studying with him. So he decided he wanted to be born again. So he said, great, Joseph, you want to baptize him? Hey, listen, I've just been a Christian. I mean, it's a long time, but in jail, I wouldn't know what to say, wouldn't know what to do, but I'll be glad to be in there with him. Okay, that'd be great. Gary, you do it. I'd forgotten this. I knew it. Gary can't speak in public. He has a phobia about speaking. It took him a long time to get where he could do a Bible study with a handful of people. When he and his wife started courting, he would write out what he wanted to say to her because it was hard for him to speak. And so he said, no, I'm not getting in front. No, I'll be glad to be up there with him. And so we're having this discussion. All three of them look at me, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'll get in and we'll do that. So the first thing, they said, it's going to be hard for him. Hillcrest is old, and we have an old baptistry. We're doing some remodeling, but the stairs are like steep like this. And so I said, hey, no problem. I'll just lean him back on me, and I'll back down the stairs. When I told my wife that, she's like, honey, you're old. We're going to have to go up and we're going to pick him up and you up, and I just hope you don't drown. I'm like, thank you, dear. I'm sure I can do that. So we did get him down the stairs. It did take a while. So we get him all set, and our baptistry is high and has a wooden doors kind of thing. So somebody opens them when you're getting ready to baptize. So it had been a good morning of worship, and we're singing. I don't even remember. It was one of the contemporary songs, but it was one of those just chill you to the bone kind of songs, and it's exciting, and we're about to baptize John, and they're just belting it out, and they get to the end of the chorus, and the guy pulling the doors thinks that's the end of the song, pulls it open, and they start right in on the next verse. And so the four of us are standing there, and they're singing the song, and John starts doing this. You can see what he's doing this, but he can only get his right hand. And so Joseph takes his hand and does this and holds his hand because Joseph wanted to be in praise to God. Then he starts crying, and Gary has just reached around him and wiped his tears away. It's one of the most powerful moments. We baptized John. The whole church applauds him, stands up for him. We get back in the back and we're changing, and John says, Steve, I'm so sorry I broke down. I'm like, why? Today's the day God wiped out all your sins. This is the greatest day of your life. And I said, he said, Steve, but you don't know how many sins I had to forgive. I said, no, I don't know all yours, but I know all mine. And that's why I'm crying too, because every time I see one of you guys, I remember what God's done for me. It's been a real battle for John. Man, he's crippled and he's an alcoholic, but he has talked to a lot of people about Jesus, brought a lot of people to Christ, prayed with a lot of people. And I tell you that story to say, you know what? You never know who would have thought God would have used a guy just out of prison and a really old bald preacher and a guy that can't even speak in public to tell a guy like John about Jesus. You have people in your life like that. I don't know how you're going to find them. I would say, well, yeah, give us the technique for finding them. Okay, pray a lot and ask God to send them. That's the only thing I know to do, but He will. And you'll have stories like that. Here's another story we use a lot for people that say things like this. Now, his name was Tom, and he is a West Texas cowboy. Now, those of you you will know part of the people in this story. John Thacker, y'all know John. Okay, we have a good friend he himself became a Christian, and he was probably 50-ish. So John was pretty late in life before he became a Christian. And he has a lot of ranch property, and he would let some of us hunt on his place. And he had a ranch foreman named Tom. And this is so bad, but he said, listen, when you shoot your deer, don't do anything. Get your cell phone, call Tom. He'll come get it, gut it, take it to the processing plant, call you when it's ready. It's like, oh, I can't do it. Okay. So and Tom is everything, every stereotype about a West Texas cowboy. I think he was probably 5'8" or 9", but he stood about 5'4" because he was bow-legged. I'm not sure he has a head because all I've ever seen is his face and a cowboy hat. That's all I've ever seen of Tom. Always had, and he liked to smoke. I've seen him literally with one in his mouth, one in his hand, and one on the dashboard lit, and just kept a continuous circle going. So we just talked to Tom, visit, and so one day I get a phone call, and he says, hey, I said, hello, and he said, hey, is this Steve, the preacher who doesn't act like a preacher? Yes, this is Steve, and I am a preacher, so who's this? He said, Tom, I'm John's guy. I said, oh yeah, good to hear from you. He said, hey, your meat's ready. I said, that's great. He said, when you want to come get it? And I said, well, I'm actually preaching south. His place was close to Brownwood, Texas. I'm a little south of Brownwood. My wife's with me. We'll come by and pick it up on the way home. Great, come by my house. He had a little mobile home. He said, I'll take you and we'll get your meat. So we go, and my wife starts to get out with me. I said, you might want to let me knock on the door first. Just telling you. And she's like, well, I know, but I've been around. I said, hey, just don't. So I knock on the door, and he opens the door, and I go, Tom? He said, yeah, I'm right here. And I said, okay. He said, hey, come in a minute. Take a deep breath, try not to breathe. So I go in, and he's sitting there at the table, and he says, you know what I'm doing? You won't know this because you preachers don't know this. You know what I'm doing? I said, you're rolling cigarettes. He said, how would a preacher know that? I said, I grew up with a granddad who smoked hand-rolled cigarettes, and I learned to roll cigarettes when I was about 4 from my granddad, so I know what you're doing. He said, but do you notice the package? Yeah. He said, you read it closely. What am I missing? He said, all natural. Those store-bought cigarettes will kill you. Okay, Tom. So I said, my wife's out here. We go out to meet him, and he, just like you would expect, he goes out, and y'all know Marcia. She's like, hey, Tom, I'm Steve's wife. Hugs him. He's like, oh, shucks, ma'am. So I said, Tom, why don't you come to church with John and I sometime? And here's what he said. Well, if I were to come in your church, the roof would fall in. And I said, do you know anything about John's story? He said, well, I just know he was a mean descriptive term, and now he's really a good guy. And I always wondered why. I said, I can tell you why. It's Jesus. And I said, you don't know my story, but One reason I don't act like a preacher because I hadn't always, there's lots of reasons, and God's been really good. And so here's the deal. If you'll sit right between John and I, no way. If the roof hadn't come down on us, no way it comes down on you. And he said, well, excuse me, ma'am, you know them 10 things? I said, 10 commandments? He said, yeah, them. I said, yeah. He said, excuse me, ma'am. I've broken all but one of those. Excuse me, ma'am. She's like, it's okay. He said, well, I broke all but one. Okay. And I said, you know, Tom, this ought to give you some comfort. Did you know that Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was a hooker? No. Yes. Would you like to hear that story? And he didn't. But, eventually I got to tell him. But, you know, I do use the Rahab story a lot for the people that think they're not good enough, not wanted, wouldn't fit in, roof would fall in because of how bad their life's been. Rahab is the great story. Because I'm a quick step this. Because she believed in God even when God's own people didn't. Remember, they showed up to take the land. And the leaders, it was like an elders meeting where the vote's 10-2. Hey, God's good and God's going to give us, but we can't do it. So I said, okay, fine, you don't want to go out there and wander around, all you guys die off, and then I'll take a new group in. And when they showed up, there she is still saying, we heard what your God did, and we are scared. Makes a deal to save her family. Remember the whole red rope thing? So now, none of y'all would know this. But in our culture and in many places in the world where prostitutes gather, it is called the red light. Wait, some of y'all know that. Okay, we will, elders. I will meet with you after, and I'll try to give you pictures of. No. You know, anybody says anything about red light district, you know what I love to say to them? Hey, you're a Bible scholar. What? I said, yeah, you know that comes from the Bible. No. Yes. Tell them the Rahab story, because remember the color of the rope? And she was a what? Red light district. That's where that comes from. But here's the part of that I use in this story for people like that. They did take the city and they did rescue her. And you remember what happened? They take her out to the people of God. And she evidently falls in love with and marries one of the men. And they have a kid who has a kid who has a kid, all the way down to Jesus. And so, of course, the point of that is if Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was a hooker, he's not going to have a problem with you bringing your baggage into our church. So that's a great story. Except I do have to tell you this part of it. I'm doing this seminar, a few years ago, and I get through and this very sweet little, I'd said the prostitute, this really sweet little old lady comes up and says, we don't use the P word in church. We use the H word. So, okay. I'm tired. So I said, yes, because hooker communicates so much better. And then I realized she's going, my wife is going behind me and she's like, I love you. I say this, you're an idiot. She means harlot. Oh, yes, that H word. Sorry, ma'am. Yeah. But you know what? In our culture, they don't know harlot. You know what they do know? Hooker, yeah. And so that is a great story to use for people that think they're not good enough. Because it really does. The lead to that was John and I saying, we hadn't always been good enough either. Now, I don't know whatever happened to Tom. His wife killed herself actually a few years later, and he moved off, and we lost track. I don't know where he is, but I think some seeds were planted. So another story that's great to use to kind of get people's heart changed a little bit. Hey, I don't want to be part of church. All your rules and all your do this and don't do it. I just want to help people. I don't want to get bogged down in all your stuff. Or, yeah, I know what church is. Church is a bunch of do-gooders, judgmental, don't love, tell you what to do. I don't want any of that. I just want to help people. When I get anything like that, I say, hey, you're speaking Jesus language. What? I said, yeah, the story of the Good Samaritan. Most people say, oh, yeah, I think I know that. He helped somebody. And I said, well, yeah, but do you know? And then there's so many great things you can tell out of that story. In our culture, it is powerful because you can talk a lot about social injustice. And in our world, that's a big thing. They don't think, because they don't see us as people that care about justice. Now, I care a whole lot more about Jesus saving people, But I do think Jesus cares about the poor. I think Jesus cares about the marginalized. I think Jesus cares about the hurting. I think Jesus cares about the people living in the midst of their horrible sin. I believe every bit of that. And so that's it's good for us to be able to say in this, hey, look, here's a guy, to have the whole Samaritan, if he's a beaten up Jew, you have all of that. It's a good place to talk about racism, if you want to talk about that. It's a good place to talk about hurting people. Here's a guy who got beaten up and left for dead. I do think it's interesting. Remember in that story, can somebody tell me real quick why he was beaten up and left for dead? Yeah, because somebody tried to rob him. Yeah, but I mean, does anybody know why they tried to rob him? Because they were robbers. Okay, you know the point of what I'm doing? I don't know if he was flashing, and if he was in the bar the night before showing off his money, and I don't know if everybody traveled in a group and he was too stupid and he traveled by himself because he was arrogant or stupid. I don't know if he was careless. I don't know if he's a good guy and the robbers had a guy laying out and he went over to help him and got jumped. I don't know why he was beat. I don't know. We find out a lot about our people's background as we talk to them, but we don't start with it. Now, why did you go to jail? How'd you get started? Now, they'll volunteer a lot of that. You don't have to know the why of everybody's mess. You don't. And sometimes you'll run them off by saying, okay, because a lot of people already feel bad. They know something's not right. And a lot of them they know they're in a mess because, well, they made a lot of bad choices. We're there to show them the way out of bad choices, not to pile it onto them before we tell them how to get out. So I think that's good in that story. You can talk about so many other things in there if you want to. You can talk about the helpless, the wounded, the needy. You can talk about all that because there he was. Unless you point out, here's God's heart. Hey, let me help you. And it took time, and it took money, and it took energy to take care of him. And I tell you that to remind you of this. This is great in this seminar. You're giving up a Saturday morning and get fired up. If you put this into practice and you start living this out and this whole church just explodes, you're going to have to spend a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money. You are. And you know what? God will give you lots of energy and lots of time and lots of money. He will. He will. You'll help each other and you will reach that. But people in a mess, it's exhausting sometimes. To tell you the truth, we could exhaust ourselves if we really shared enough. But it's hard. We're in a fallen world. And it's hard to live in a fallen world. And there are a lot of hard choices people have to make to follow Jesus. And when they give up all the life they know to follow Jesus, when they give up their friends because they can't be around their friends, we have to become their friends. So there's so much of that you can tell. And the other thing you can tell out of this story, when they say, hey, church really hurt me, I'll never have anything to do with the church, I say, I'm sorry, Jesus didn't appreciate when that happened either. Really? Yeah. So I tell them the Good Samaritan, I say the two guys that went by. I used to tell this story all the time and say a preacher and an elder came by. And one day my wife said, you're a preacher and an elder. A deacon and a Bible class teacher. I had to change a little bit to tell it for today. But, Jesus was pretty gentle. But there's a little bit of an implied, hey, they saw him but didn't really see him. They looked but didn't see him, went by on the other side. So I just tell them, hey, Jesus doesn't. We're not perfect. We're a bunch of people trying to follow Jesus. Sometimes we really mess up. And if church ever hurts you, I am sorry. If a Christian ever hurts you, I'm sorry. If I ever hurt you, I'm sorry. That's not who we want to be, and we are getting better. Now somebody says, no, wait. A lot of people, they misunderstood, and you need to explain to them that your church is not like that, and don't try to defend. We don't have to defend God or Jesus or church. I just say, man, if you were hurt somewhere, I'm sorry. Yeah, I went to the Holy Church of the Toenail, and that wasn't even the right church anyhow. So you don't have to do any of that. Just say, I'm sorry if you feel like you were hurt by church. I'm sorry, because we're not perfect people. We are trying desperately to be better and more like Jesus. So what we've just done is talk about the people that say, okay, this world's so bad. How do you explain that? I use the story of the fall. Well, if you knew how bad I was, I use the story of Rahab. Well, I just want to help people. I use the story of the Good Samaritan. It helps them get a better glimpse of what we want to be as a community of faith. So I'm going to say this. It is really important that they know we want to be the church of Christ, not the church of Christ. For the lost people in our world, they don't need to know which church is right or wrong. You know what they need to know? Jesus died for your sins, and God raised him from the dead. Yeah, but what if they become a Christian? Then they won't know all the... Then we're going to disciple them. We're going to walk along with them. We're going to answer all their questions. But sometimes we really do get that cart before the horse. You know, yeah, I used to know something about the Church of Christ. Aren't you the people who, and then fill in the blank, whatever it is. Hey, y'all the people don't believe in music. Oh, we do believe in music. Let me take the next 2 hours and explain to you. And so that way when they go to heaven and God says, hey, did you know my son? No, but I can tell you why the Church of Christ didn't use an organ. I'm not sure that gets them in. But I do know who gets them in. Jesus. So you're saying all the other stuff's not important? No. I'm saying it's not near as important as Jesus. Hence, we are the church of Christ. And that better be a description. And the emphasis better be on the last word in that phrase, not on the first one. I don't even believe that's a title. I think that's our description. We're the church of Christ. That people, okay, call it Church of Jesus. I don't care. That's the emphasis is who we are about. So, let me tell you a little bit about some other ways to introduce stories, and then we'll take I don't know, what Clint say, a 3-hour break? Oh, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, long enough to eat. Okay. So, let me tell you a little bit about ways you get to tell now there are a million people that will come to a million things about how to get involved, how to get to tell your story. I'm going to share with you things personally that will happen to you, that these are what you look for as opportunities to say, hey, would you like to hear more? Would you like to hear a story? Can I tell you? So here they go. Lifestyle credibility is always the biggie. Always. I joke a lot about going to have cheeseburgers when all the other guys are going to drink at the bar. But you don't think everybody knew where those of us that didn't do that, where we were and why? Lifestyle credibility always matters. Well, why don't you laugh at that joke? Why aren't you going to, when we're all doing our expense account that way, why don't you ever cuss? I know you have to be mad. Why don't you? Man, lifestyle credibility. Oh, hey man, I hear your mom's really sick. Yeah, I think she's dying. You must be devastated. Well, I am, but hope of heaven. Oh yeah, I keep forgetting you're a Christian. Yeah, no, I mean really, that's how I'm gonna get through this. Can I tell you why? Yeah, how come you don't cuss on the golf course? Well, I'm a preacher and I'll get fired if I do. No, because I'm trying to be like Jesus. Can I tell you how that happened? Why that matters to me? Lifestyle credibility always matters, and people will sometimes ask. My favorite story with that, we had a lady move in next door. And I'm not a great yard guy. This is when we lived in town, and I mean, my yard wasn't great, but at least I would occasionally mow it, and you know. A lady named Kathy moves in next door, and she just didn't touch her yard. I mean, I was always telling my wife, I said, geez, I'm going to rent a goat and put in her yard so I can see the street. She doesn't even try to mow it, blah, 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 you know. So one day my wife and I are doing yard work. Marcia's mowing, I'm weed eating. And she goes right to our edge of our driveway, right across the driveway, right into Kathy's yard. And I'm like, oh my, she's had a stroke. I need to go get her and stop the mower and see if she's okay. And then she gives me that look that says, stop on our yard and go start on hers. So I tried over there, and I'm weed eating her edge of her, and Kathy pulls up about halfway through, gets out of her car, and just does this. So we shut everything off and go over there, and I couldn't even think of her name, but Marcia said, hi, Kathy, and I went, hey, Kathy. I'm pretty sharp that way. And she said, what are y'all doing? I'm thinking, we're mowing your yard because you don't. What do you think we're doing? But Marcia says, well, it looks like you could use some help, and Jesus has been really good to us, so we want to help you. I'm like, yeah, what she said. And so Kathy says, well, are you going to do the back? So I watched my wife do this. Steve will. I thought, oh, this is not going to be good. And it was bad. But we cleaned up her yard. Well, then Marcia goes over to visit and finds out she had never mowed a yard because her ex did all that. And her husband divorced her and then died. And she moved to Abilene to start again. And she told Marcia, I've got a lawnmower. I don't know what to do with it. Marcia says, Steve can teach you. There's a pattern there that's really, but still. And she said, would y'all do that? And she said, yeah, that's what God's people do. So long story short, we had several studies. She got married again, had several studies with them. They moved off. Last time I heard, they were going to church. I don't know where it is exactly, but I think, seeds get planted because when you do things for people and you put it in the name of Jesus. So we do anything for anybody. If they don't ask, we say something about, hey, God loves you, Jesus, here you go. People will often say, why are you doing that? Why are you showing up? Why are you giving? Because Jesus has been good to us, and he wants us to be good to others. Talk about Jesus. Current events are great. Earthquakes, tsunamis, natural disasters, all of those are great. Political elections, oh yeah, we need to be telling everybody out there who they ought to vote for so we can be a Christian nation. Hey, yeah, no. No. But when people are like, man, the world's going to end when Kamala Trump gets elected, that is it. It is over. Or Donald Harris. Pick your whoever you... And what are we going to do if... I love people to ask me that. Aren't you worried? I'm like, no, my kingdom's good. Yeah, been here a long time. Way for United States. Kingdom I belong to. Oh, yeah, you're talking about Jesus, aren't you? Yeah, can I tell you why it matters? Can I tell you why I don't care what happens here? Because you know what? My kingdom's going to be okay anyhow. Well, you care. Yeah, I do care, but I don't care. Because my kingdom's going to be... And for all I know, if you're a big Kamala Trump fan and Donald Harris wins, maybe God's saying, hey, you think it's going to be bad, but that's going to open more doors than you could ever dream to share the gospel. And then I need to say, wow, that away, God, cool. I thought I was saving a country, and you're literally saving the people in that country. So I love people to ask me about tsunamis, all that. I say, hey, I use the fall or whatever. I say, yeah, I believe God was right there when. I believe God did. So I love people to ask about the cultural references are great. All right, any of y'all know what March Madness is? Okay, don't tell me if you won anything in your last bracket. I don't want to know. Elders don't want to know if you were gambling on your bracket. But every year at March Madness, you know what somebody always says? This is a real David-Goliath matchup. Meaning this little bitty school, like, I don't know, Abilene Christian, playing some really good school, like, I don't know, University of Texas. That's a David-Goliath matchup, and occasionally David wins. But when I hear that, you know what I always tell them? Oh, you're a Bible scholar. Yeah. And they're like, what? I said, that's from the Bible. Oh, yeah, didn't David kill some giant? Yeah, and you know about the whole cutting off his head and all that. What? Well, can I tell you that story? Cultural references sometimes will get you into discussions. Life situations are great. Somebody comes in and, boy, you can clear they're upset, and it's like, I don't know, I thought marriage would be different. My wife doesn't, and I didn't, or boy, I really messed up. Or they come in and sit down and look at you and go, I know animals eat their young. I have teenagers, and okay, yeah, okay. And when people, I'm like, man, what's going on? You want to talk about it? Can I pray for you? I say, hey, I get it. I raised teenagers. My grands, well, now they're almost all about to be out of teenage years. And I say, I understand. Hey, I get married. I've been married 51 years, and this is a true story, by the way. Several years ago, I was preaching somewhere, and I walked by and heard my wife say to somebody, we've had 30 wonderful years. I was like, oh, I said, honey, we've been married 35. And she said, yes, and 30 have been wonderful. And then I thought, well, 30 out of 35 is not bad, But there was some truth under that. Okay, whatever it is that life situations, we get to say, you know what? I get it. We've been there, or I know. Somebody says, man, I can't quit drinking. I say, yeah, hey, I get it. I got 3 good friends at church that live through exactly where you are. That's why we need to know each other's stories, by the way. So those are good things to say. Can I help you? I can tell you how we got through it. Can I talk to you about? I like challenges. Okay, you're God. How do you explain? And what do you think about? And Yeah, okay, I'd like to sit down and talk to you about it. I love questions. How was your weekend? Hey, it was great. I was at church Sunday, and the preacher preached about dove dung. Now, y'all are going, what did he just say? And what is it? I'm going to preach on that in the morning. Okay, I saw 3 elders pass out. Sorry, but that's okay. There is a story in the Bible about dove dung. Some of y'all know that story. I'm going to talk about it in the morning. But that's a great, you don't think that won't start a conversation about Jesus? Hey, my preacher preached about dove dung. Dove dung? What do you mean? Well, it's in the Bible when people were eating it and paying for it. What? What? Can I tell you that story? I love that. Or, hey, my weekend was great. I went to church. Oh, yeah, I forget you went to church. Yeah, but it was great because I was 2 rows behind Bill. And I remember a year ago when they said he wouldn't last a month. And we all got around, we were praying, and, there he is. Wow. All right, how was your weekend? It was great. I went to the funeral. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, it was a celebration because they're a believer and they're in heaven. Or, man, I went to church, and it's great because, Jimmy and Sue were about 4 rows over from me, and you probably don't know them, but I remember when I thought the next time I saw Sue, it'd be when she was on trial for killing him because, man, they were sitting there in church holding hands and doing communion together. And really, what happened? Well, Jesus kind of got in the middle of it. There are lots of things. And then I'm a big inviter. I think you'll get a lot of conversation started if you'll just learn to be an inviter. You do community events. You do any kind of grief thing, any kind of kid thing, any kind of thing that's helpful to the community. Invite everybody. You invite your friends and you bring them, by the way. Well, I don't want to hear anything about grief because bring them anyhow. Bring them. Invite them to church. Invite them to Neighbor Day. Invite them over for a meal. Take them out for coffee. Man, almost all of my story, every time I ask somebody if I can share a story, it's couched in, hey, you want to come over and eat with my wife and I, and we'll tell a Jesus story. Hey, you want to go have coffee, and we'll tell a Jesus story. I will give you this piece of advice, guys. It's really important if you say you want to come over and have a meal and we'll tell a Jesus story. I highly suggest you let your wife know you did that. I don't want to tell you why. I know that's a really important thing. Just trust me on this one. That's a big deal for her to know. Before the doorbell rings, it's a really big deal. So there are lots of ways. That's how you start conversation. You always be looking. You always be wanting. You always be saying the name Jesus. And you always ask God to keep sending you people. And you will be amazed how they will show up. I'm going to close on this. We'll do our break time and meet back at 11 or 11:01. I'll give you a minute flexibility. Something is happening in our world, and something is happening in our country for the gospel. I don't know if any of you keep up with what's going on college campuses all over our world. Last one I heard about was a week ago at the University of Arkansas. 10,000 kids out doing praise, baptized 800 of them in one night. Happened at Auburn. Faulkner baptized our whole football team a couple of years ago. Happened at was it Vanderbilt? Somewhere else in Tennessee had another big one. Those revivals, those gospel things, those Jesus breaking out, it is happening in college campuses all over. It's happening at Hillcrest and Abilene. God is bringing us people by the dozens to want to know about Jesus. And I believe it can break out right here in Boise. Maybe right here at Linder Road. You start praying and then God just starts sending. Okay, so maybe we can meet. What kind of budget do we need? I don't know. Well, how do we set it up? I don't think you can. Well, what do we do? Just start praying and asking when they start showing up, start talking about Jesus. That's it. That's all the program I got. So we're going to take our break. When we get back, we'll talk about stories that introduce Jesus, and then we'll finish with the stories that move them from knowing to following. Okay, break.